This bill is really straightforward in many respects. We've all just lived through a devastating pandemic. It's upended our lives in so many different ways. It's taken lives. It has damaged businesses. It has undermined livelihoods. It has upset schooling and on and on and on. We don't want to live through another one. And there are a couple things we need to do. One is to take every step we can to reduce the risk of a future pandemic, and there are steps we can take, working here domestically and also working with international partners. And we need to make sure that when the next one does come, that we are best prepared for it. And I don't propose that I've managed to include every single thing that should be included in this piece of legislation, but the architecture is there.
Wake up call.
This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
I'm going to read something to you, and then I'm just going to ask you, do you believe this is basically what's part of the legislation? So, promote health, prevent and control chronic disease and injuries, prevent and control infectious diseases, prepare for and respond to public health emergencies, serve as a central point for sharing Canada's expertise with the rest of the world, apply international research and development to Canada's public health programs, and strengthen collaboration on public health and facilitate national approaches to public health policy and planning. Would you agree that that's what this legislation is about?
In many respects, yes, Robert. At the same time, though, the legislation is really focused on taking a set of ideas around public health and ensuring that they're embedded in an accountability framework. And I want to emphasize what the legislation really is about is ensuring there's an accountability framework that would include many of the components that you're talking about. And then I would liken it to the climate accountability law that we've got, where the obligation is on the government to come up with a plan, to table the plan in Parliament on a recurring basis. There are progress reports associated with it. And this, in similar parallel fashion, would require the government to come up with a plan and to, on a recurring basis, table the plan and an updated plan every 3 years.
I will expand a little bit more on that then, and add some other parts to it. As in, develops and maintains national emergency response plans for the Public Health Agency of Canada and Health Canada, monitors outbreaks of global disease events, assesses public health risks during emergencies, contributes to keeping Canada's health and emergency policies in line with threats to public health security and general security for Canadians in collaboration with other federal and international health and security agencies, is responsible for the important federal public health rules governing laboratory safety and security, quarantine, and similar issues, and is the health authority in the Government of Canada on bioterrorism, emergency health services, and emergency response. Now, other than putting in the time frame to check on those, would you agree that that's part of what this legislation is about?
You're talking about, it sounds like you're talking about an authority that has responsibility for some of the measures related to pandemic prevention and preparedness. If I could put a question back so there's clarity here, the office that you are suggesting their listing off a set of responsibilities, where is a public-facing prevention and preparedness plan available? Where does it reside? And how can experts and third parties weigh in to say it's sufficient or it's insufficient?
So, and I will clarify that now, because basically what I was just reading you were the mandate of the Public Health Agency of Canada, so that's what we already have in place, as well as with the mandate for the Centre for Emergency Preparedness and Response Structure. Those are already in place, and the legislation basically is repeating those same things that are already in place today. We had the president of the Public Health Agency here just a couple weeks ago, in which I asked for a plan, which was the Auditor General had said that should be put in place. And she said there was a plan, which we never received because it can't be found. So to me, the legislation is good if it's going to make certain that the Public Health Agency puts it on paper so that people can see that plan. That part I love about the legislation. It talks about putting, but when we already have it in place well past was before 2016, that this came forward, and it still hasn't been done. Why will this piece of legislation make it happen when it hasn't been done when it should have been?
And I think the short answer is because there's parliamentary accountability here, and there hasn't been to date, right? So you can put anything in a mandate letter to a minister, you can put anything in a mandate letter to a government official, but unless there's ongoing accountability, and at law here, what this bill would do is require that kind of accountability to us in Parliament. Where's the plan? What does the plan say? Is the plan sufficient? And Robert, we could go off and consult with our own experts and say, this is missing. This should be worded differently. Well, not enough is being done. And it's the very same reason we've got a climate accountability law. We need a law like this.
Thank you. You know, and I hear you, and I see that, and you and I have discussed over time, over the years. But ultimately, how do we get that in place? And I agree. When we're looking at, we're repeating things to recreate what we already have, when what we need is accountability to have the agencies that are supposed to be doing this for us, doing it. Public Health Agency of Canada came into place in 2003, 2004, after the SARS epidemic, as you indicated. It was put in place to do these steps to be prepared for the pandemic and preparing for it such that we could get it done. And so, to me, taking this legislation and saying, let's just make sure we have the report is what, and I think that's what you're looking for, is let's just get this done and get a report on what's happened and where we succeeded and where we failed.
Not only. So the bill does ask for a report, and I've mentioned that in a review. But the core architecture and the core accountability architecture here is actually, I think, addressing the primary concern you're raising, which is it's not enough, and it wasn't enough to say, PHAC, here are your obligations. Prepare us for the next pandemic. It obviously fell off. PHAC has a number of responsibilities. Who is the individual person in PHAC who is responsible for coordinating pandemic prevention preparedness? Someone needs that core accountability, and this legislation sets that down. 2, it requires the government to table a plan to Parliament. So when you ask the PHAC for a plan, they say, well, we have a plan, don't worry about it. And that's insufficient. We as a public have just lived through something we never thought we were going to live through. We never want to live through again. And we better have ongoing accountability from not just this government, all future governments, to ensure this never falls off the table and there's ongoing accountability to Parliament.
Monsieur le Président, il n'y a pas de traduction présente.
I read your bill carefully, and I understand its intent. However, as a legislator, as we speak, I would say that even though the intention of the bill is very laudable, and you've done your research, I still think you're putting the cart before the horse.
It's quite clear that there are two major parts to this bill. The first part calls for a review of the government's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the second part deals with the creation of a pandemic prevention and preparedness plan. I'm going to congratulate you on half of it. I totally support the pandemic prevention preparedness plan, and couldn't be more opposed to the review provision of the bill, and I can tell you that I will be supporting the bill if the review portion of the bill is completely excised from the bill. Are you okay with, and will you support the NDP's motion when we move it, to excise Section 3 and Section 4.2E of the bill, to remove all parts of this bill that would have the government set up a review structure of its own, and keep the part of the bill that establishes a pandemic prevention preparedness plan? Will you agree with that amendment?
In short, yes. And let me say, Don, and I appreciate the proposal. Let me say that the intention was never to oust any kind of independent review. And if you remember SARS, in Ontario, we had an independent commission and a properly independent judicial commission. And then we also had, at the federal level, a National Advisory Committee on SARS and Public Health, which was more what I was imagining, and that was chaired by David Naylor. I consulted with David Naylor, by the way, in the course of putting this bill together. I at no point had intended to oust some parallel independent track. It was really to say, how do we best inform a plan and make sure a review is a component of that? But I don't want any distraction.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation here today. It's rather challenging when we find out that we're basically only talking about half of the bill if you've already agreed and there's some kind of a deal on the books to get rid of half of the bill. It would have been nice to have just had that.
I did mention it in the House. I did mention in the House at second reading that I was open to that change as well. So it's not news anymore.
No, but saying that you're open to it and the deal has already been done is a little different. Fair enough.
What I really worry with your bill, and I don't think it's intention in this way whatsoever, but I fear that the government has the opportunity to use it in this way and say just exactly what Don indicated, the minister's response at our committee when we go and ask, well, when is this going to happen? Because we've been talking about this for so long, and they use your bill as a shield right now to say, you know what, it's already something that's being talked about. So you've answered a little bit, but I don't even know if I necessarily need comment from you. But I think just more of a caution.
I've got a good answer for you, Matt. I've got a good answer for you, though, Matt. Which is,
I hope the answer is short because we're out of time.
Sure. I mean, last I checked, the Liberals don't have a majority. And so if you want this bill to deliver an independent review, you can amend the bill accordingly. You can either delete it, as Don's asking, or you can work with Don and make it independent.
And so perhaps what this will do is actually create the re-existence of GPIN, which was the Global Public Health Intelligence Network, which was in place until 2019 and then was shut down. And one of the things that we found out during COVID, when we first saw this on our table in 2020, that all of a sudden this wasn't in place to monitor these aspects. So,
how can provincial, municipal, and regional governments best be engaged when it comes to the legislation and pandemic prevention and preparedness?
I'm really glad you asked this question because it's a section of the bill that I struggled with, and I don't think I landed perfectly, and I would welcome help in getting it to a better place. So when you look at section C and D, for example, there's an acknowledgement that we need sustained collaboration between the Minister of Health and provincial governments, Indigenous communities in the development of the plan in order to align approaches and address any jurisdictional challenges. And boy, do we live through many jurisdictional challenges in the course of our own pandemic response. D is I think a section that you guys could improve because it says provide for training programs including collaborative activities with other levels of government, Indigenous communities, and relevant agencies. I didn't really mean training programs, as it were. Speaking with David Naylor, he emphasized, and others emphasized as well, the need for tabletopping and simulation exercises. The idea that you would work collaboratively as a federal government alongside provincial governments, and you would actually have simulation and municipal governments, and you have simulation exercises to test the plan that you have and improve the plan accordingly. And so that really isn't about training, it's about you could talk about training, but what I really wanted to drive at was simulation exercises with other levels of government. And so that could be a section that you could improve upon to speak directly to that concern, Sonia.